from Miss Blaney for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you so much for being here with us, Sammy. I hope it's all right that I call you Sammy, and thank you so much for your service, and thank you for taking the time to really rigorously explain a lot of these things. One of the things I've learned in this role is you think you know a little something, and then you find out how much you don't know, and you just have to work harder. So thank you for helping us understand. Just for my own clarity, a couple of times you've talked about insurance and then you've talked about pension, and in the terms of the 20 and the 40%. Can you just explain that so that I understand what we're talking about?
So I think my perspective on Veterans Affairs is not unique.
Yeah.
I see Veterans Affairs Canada as an organization within the Government of Canada that primarily deals in commemoration and insurance of veterans' benefits. So when I talk about insurance and I talk about pensions, I'm generally referring to, I'm very specifically talking about the monthly tax-free disability benefit, right? And if you want to show a Canadian that their service has equanimity with wartime service veterans, then you pay our injured the same amount. So when I'm talking about insurance and pensions, I'm simply reminding you that the pension we are getting, it's not a pension because we served. This is not a service pension. This is not money that Canadian veterans are getting for being good people. This is because we've lost the leg. I came back from Rwanda with PTSD, multiple intestinal parasites in the topical skin, and these things stuck with me for a decade. You don't get a pension for that. You get injury insurance for that, and that is managed under various pensions. So what happens is veterans commonly refer to pensions, which often mislead people into believing that this is something other than injury insurance. It is in fact injury insurance.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much. It really helped me understand. So in your beginning intervention, you talked about Australia having a model that's based on risk. And so when we look at what we're hoping to suggest to the government, and I agree, we know, like you said in your presentation, that the Korean veterans fought for this. They had to go through their whole 30 years, and now the Persian Gulf veterans are going through the same thing. And after that, it will be the next set of Afghan veterans. And it seems to me very time-consuming that veterans who served now have to come back and fight this fight just to get something that is respectful to their service. So I'm just wondering, you talked about Australia. Is that a model that we should look at? And how does it assess risk? Because I think what you said is so important, is it can be classified anything, but the risk is really what matters.
That's a great question. And that's a great question. That's a question the Department of National Defense does not want me to answer. Because there are legal documentation out there which will help us classify missions. And they come from the organizations that we're part of, the United Nations and NATO. So for example, first off, on the question concerning Australia, there is a Commonwealth insurance model which is based primarily on 3 tiers. And I'll use bronze, silver, and gold. And that's exactly what Australia does. Their soldiers who get injured in a war are awarded a gold insurance card, the color is actually gold, and that gives them more benefits. The reason they get that is because they're in a place where there's more disease, more risk of death. They're being asked to do things which will, often result in serious injury or harm, okay? So those are what the UN calls Chapter 7 missions. Are you familiar with those terms? So the UN, so as a rule of law country, Canada will never go into a foreign country with an arm with a weapon unless the United Nations provides a United Nations resolution stating clearly that this is a Chapter 6 or this is a Chapter 7 mission. Those Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 missions each have legal documents which indicate when we are allowed to shoot people. This legal document is what we use to determine whether it's a peacekeeping mission or a war, right? Peacekeeping missions, they invite you into the country to do peacekeeping. War, they don't invite you into the country, and you're going there to take their property from them. So they each have inherent documentation with them, and those documentations are what the Australian government uses to classify its missions. If you're in if you're in service in your country and you hurt yourself falling down in your office, you get roughly the same thing that a Canadian would get, or an Australian would get on workplace safety. That's normal. When you get placed on active service and you go to peacekeeping, but you're not really being shot at, but there are some risks, you're getting more money. When you go to war and you're being told that out of the 12 of you, 2 of you will likely die today and 4 of you are going to be injured, we need to take that hill, that's gold level insurance. And that's what Canada calls wartime, special duty, and service. The only difference between our system and the Australian system is we only ever get to the bottom 2 tiers. And the government of Canada always stops us from getting to wartime service, never brings it up, hopes it dies and goes away, and that Mike and I and Harold never come and speak to members of Parliament about it.
Well, good news, you're here today.
Wonderful.
So you talked about the change from 20% to 40%. What year was that? Do you know?
So that was the change when the current Liberal government took over. There was a discussion, and this is a lesson in not using proper policy definitions. Veterans had stated they wanted the pension for life.
Yeah.
They didn't very specifically state that they wanted the monthly tax-free disability benefit from the Pension Act. And what they got was they got a 20%, they got a 100% increase in benefits from 20 to 40%. And then they stretched that over a lifetime. But it is still just 40% of what wartime service in the RCMP get. You're welcome, ma'am. Thank you.